Hi.
Hello! Welcome everyone to the season finale of season 8 of Bios and Bookmarks. It is a great honor to be joined today by Sharma Taylor, author of the excellently titled What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You, published by Virago. Sharma, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. And the pleasure is all mine because I tell everybody who will listen that this novel is really a Bocas baby, having gotten started through the support from the Johnson and Amoya Chung Prize. So I'm forever in the debt of Bocas Lit Fest team for all their
We
support.
will we will happily take on that endorsement always. So for those of you who are not familiar with Sharma's work, you will want to be. But first of all, let me introduce you to her. She is a Jamaican writer and lawyer living between Jamaica and Barbados. Sharma holds a PhD from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, obtained on a Commonwealth scholarship. Her short stories have been shortlisted 3 times for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize and have won several prizes, including the Frank Collymore Literary Endowment Prize, as she just mentioned, the Johnson and Amoy Achong Caribbean Writers Prize, and the Queen Mary Wasafiri New Writing Prize. And the book we're going to hear Sharma read from and discuss today, What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You, is also her debut novel. As many of you will know, this season we've been discussing the complexity of Caribbean love, which explores love in all its connotations and permutations across the books of the Caribbean and its diaspora. What does love mean when we speak of it in carnal, emotional, financial, spiritual, and domestic terms? As you'll hear in Sharma's 2 readings, the first of which she is poised to share with us, What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You, grapples with this theme in some truly astonishing and deeply moving ways. And so I thought it perfect that her book round out this season. Sharma, over to you for your first reading.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shivani. And just to ground the discussion or the reading, this book is set in the mid 1980s in Jamaica. As you can tell, I'm a Jamaican writer. And I decided to set it in a particular time and space in my country in terms of what was happening politically. The book does explore love in all its forms. And the basic premise for those who are unfamiliar with it is 18 years before the story starts, Dinah, who is a Jamaican helper, falls pregnant at 18, gives up her child to her employers at the time, who were an American couple living in Jamaica. She names her baby Son. He's taken at the hospital from her, and they leave Jamaica and promise to keep in touch, which they never do. She never has any other children and just basically moves on or tries to move on with her life. 18 years pass, she's working for a different couple, another Jamaican couple, and they are hosting friends from overseas. And a boy comes in, who's a couple, and Dinah is convinced that this is her baby boy, who she had named Son. The name he goes by is Apollo. And the novel explores, what happens as a result of that meeting. So, their lives are changed, the lives of people around them are changed. And, what does family mean, and all of those themes which are explored. And the reading I'm going to get to now, finally, is a chapter told from the perspective of Regina. So some chapters are told through first person, some are third. And Regina is one of the people who live in the community that Dinah does. So one of the young girls. So They are now out on their first date because Regina and Apollo have met, and in the way of love, he's asked her out, and so she's reflecting on that. So Shivani, you tell me when I get to my 10 minutes. I tend to get caught sometimes in reading. I just go on and on. Anyway, Apollo have pretty teeth. You know, like rich people teeth. No cavities. Not a one yellow, brown, or black. None chipped or missing neither. The teeth of somebody who have a dentist who use braces to straighten them teeth. Not one gold tooth. Not like every wannabe bad man in Lazarus Gardens. It's late Saturday afternoon and we're here at Hillshire Beach and he's eating a piece of bami. I'm going to have to show him how to hold it. You don't eat fried bami with knife and fork, I tell him. It's hard to cut. Him put down a knife and fork he was struggling with, and me watch him pretty teeth sink into the bami. I tell him if he want it soft, he must order steam one next time. I know this is not the beach he was expecting. For one thing, is plenty little wooden shacks dotting the shore that selling all sort of fish, lobster and crab. The paint on the shacks in all kind of color. Red, green, black, yellow, some peeling from where the sun hit them day after day. The nails holding the wood together, rusty from the salty air. You pick your fish from a whitey glue packed with slabs of ice. I make sure Apollo don't pick any fish that eyes look cloudy. That's how you know them catch it for a long time. They cook the food over charcoal and wood fire. People selling watches from China, weed, wallets, all kind of Jamaican souvenirs. Women walking up and down selling peppered shrimp. Girls selling cologne, hair gel, matches, lighters, toothpicks, rags and towels. Boys leading horses asking if you want to pay for a horseback ride. Women braiding white women hair into cornrows and putting beads on the ends. Boombox playing dancehall music loud, and men selling bootleg cassettes. It's all business here. The locals in the water swimming and jumping up and down, waiting on them fish them order to fry. Man, I was expecting it to be more quiet. I finish him sentence. If it's quiet you want, Goma Bay, not Kingston. Him asked me if we can go into the water after we eat. I tell him yes, but it's not too clean. The grooms that work at the Caymanas racetrack take the horses here and bathe them in the water every morning. And the horses do on the sand and in the water too. Then you have the seaweed to contend with. People dump all sorts of things into the water, I tell him. One time I even find a floating condom that I think was a jellyfish. Maybe another time, him say. The food's good though. Him nibble on him parrotfish. When him finish him other piece of banh Apollo asked me how long me know Damien. I sip my Sprite. It ice cold like I like it. Refreshing. About 3 years now since I moved into that yard. I don't tell him that Damien is my dealer, and when I don't have money, I trade myself. So what kind of dude is he? Apollo asked. What to say? Dreamer, crafty, hardhead. I take mostly crack and weed. Can't afford coke or heroin. They may sell me cheap sometimes or just give me for free. Him don't like when I use it though, which don't make no sense since him is a dealer. He monitor how much me take and keep me on a strict supply. Damien get the drugs from Strego and him crew who work for British. I tell Damien I can stop anytime I want. Anytime. I not stopping now because I don't have a reason. It make me feel good, and what's wrong with that? Feeling good is a nice thing. Nice like how Apollo looking at me now as him sit beside me at the table, eyes shining. Him draw him chair closer. Him have long eyelash like a woman, soft looking lips. Him fingers tearing apart the next piece of bami that look clean and neat. No calluses or dirt on them nail. Apollo have a softness, not like Damien hard edge. But think Damien's toughness is sake of his mother, Kathleen, and what she do to him. But it's not for me to tell Apollo otherwise, especially since it's something that Damien don't like talk about. I tell Apollo that Damien sure I'm going to be a big DJ one day. So what's the deal with Dinah? I know Dinah is a good lady, better than my mother Bubbles for sure. Dinah look after other people. She okay. I break off the head of my fried snapper. I love to suck the eyeballs. Them remind me of little black beads. Apollo screw up him face. I tell him the head is the best part of the fish. Him offer me his own. Here, him say, I can't eat it. I tell him I help Dinah by looking out for her mother when Dinah gone on the road. Oh, you mean that crazy old lady? I tell him, yeah. What I don't say is I kind of afraid of mama sometimes. Whenever she in her right mind, she says some things will make her sound like a prophet. She see things that most people don't see. I, as a wind, whip up a little sand and blow it across the table. Then Apollo come out straight and tell me, so you know, Dinah thinks I'm her son? How I must know, I tell him. Truth be told, me never hear Dinah mention a pitney before, and I always wonder why a woman her age never breed. I never ask her though. Dinah not the talkative type. People like that always full of secrets they don't even want to tell them own self. But her mother must know her own child. Me watch a little girl throw a red and white ball to a boy a little taller than her. The boy miss it and the wind blow it into the sea. The girl start ball and the boy try to hug her and then him dive into the water after it. But the ball looked like it landed on a current that carried far, far out, too far for him to reach. A woman, probably the girl's mother, on the shore shouting after the boy, who bobbing like a little dot in the water. If it's true and I'm her son, it'd be too crazy, right? Apollo don't realize that crazy things happen in this life. Trust me, I know. Like me and a man like him sitting here eating fish. I did see Apollo when him come back to the tournament yard yesterday to see Dinah. I catch him as he was leaving, walking down the steps. I just come in from the corner shop. All I had in the bag was a little flour and saltfish to make fritters. Hey, I say, real casual, like I don't care if him answer or not. But I make sure to stand close to him in my tight blouse and jeans miniskirt, so close that him could smell my nice perfume Mr. Mac just buy for me. The scent of roses or something so it named. I so glad Mr. Mac was at work. Apollo look a little frightened, and I seem don't know what to say. Him start staring on a spot on the ground. I say what I know him thinking. You want to see me again? Yeah, I wanna go out with you, him say. Me know right there so. Me have him. And him don't even know it yet. As I move past him, me say, pick me up tomorrow. I gotta pause there, Shivani. How many minutes did I go?
That's actually slightly under 10 minutes, so that was
Okay.
great. I think you gave us a really wonderful, fully realized sense of what's happening in this scene, and it was a beautiful window into the world of the novel. So thank you for that reading.
Thank
Thank you
you.
also for everyone who's joined us and who is active in the comments this evening. It's lovely to see so many of you this early in the new year tuned in to bios and bookmarks. And we have a lovely comment from Ira Mathur joining us who says, this prose reading is poetry. So
Oh,
clearly
thank
your
you.
reading is reaching hearts and minds across the world.
Oh, thank you.
And
That's lovely.
also a comment from Barbara Jenkins who says, love her reading voice. So
Oh,
again,
thank you. As word as going too fast. So thank you.
no, thank you so much for grounding us in the world of what a mother's love don't teach you. And as we enter our Q&A segment of our conversation, I want to remind our viewers and listeners that we would love to hear from you. So please, if you have questions and comments for Sharma about what a mother's love don't teach you or about Sharma's wider body of work, please feel free to leave them in the chat and comment box, and we will share them with her as our live progresses. And we have also, before I ask my first question, I'm going to share this comment from Marta Cruz, who says, a breath of our Caribbean, which I think is quite beautiful.
Thank you.
So, Sharma, many have said that a writer's first book, kind of for better or worse, betrays their most secretly held obsessions. And
Mm.
so, as we get into our conversation, I want to know to what extent the themes and the plot of What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You have been living with you before you started consciously putting the novel to paper?
That's a really good question. I think this was the book I was meant to write, and I didn't know until I wrote it. And by that, I mean the main protagonist in the novel is a domestic helper.
Hmm.
And growing up in my family, my mom was a teacher. So when she was at school, I mean, we had a full time living helper at the time, and a series of them, in fact. So in terms of myself, my first word wasn't mama or dada or anything like that. Mommy went to school one day. She came back home. I think I was maybe 9 or 10 months or some ridiculously young time. And the help at the time said, "You know that the baby is talking." And mommy said, "What do you mean the baby is talking?" And the help at the time said, held me up and said, "Sharma, do it, do it, do it." And I said, "Hortense, Hortense, Hortense," because her name was Hortense. So I think, and in terms of Hortense, she was my very first nanny, very first helper. And she was sent away when I was about two, maybe just touching two. And in my family, my mom often talks about Hortense and the kind of helper she was, the kind of person she was, and how she loved me as a baby. And she was sent away not because she did anything to me, but apparently mommy was told that men were coming to the house when she was not there, and of course, you can't have that. She had many suitors. But the point is, I don't know her last name. If I see her now, we would pass each other on the street and not know. And so the whole idea of having somebody was so elemental in your life who gave you spoken word, but then we wouldn't know each other today. I think that sort of always sat with me, like, helpers are in our families in the Caribbean in lots of ways, but their life stories are sort of hidden or secret or not known. And so I wanted to use this novel in a way to kind of focus on a helper and her life, and to kind of get beneath the surface. And so to that extent, I'm obsessed with questions like about loss, about what is family, and the dynamics between families, whether they're biological or families that come together by choice. And so that's why this novel is how it is and looks at that central question. And because I'm a child of the 80s, of course, I'm going to set it in the 80s. And because it was such a pivotal period in Jamaican history, and in a sense, the struggle between Dinah and Apollo's mother, who is Celeste, an African American, sort of fighting for this boy in the middle, is sort of, at the time, the whole capitalism and socialism struggle with Jamaica in the middle between, the friendship with Castro and America's concern about communism springing up in our backyard. So those are the kinds of things that have sort of melted together, along with love of music and food and spiritualism, all that melted down to become this novel.
It's an immense amount of observation and research that is packed very tightly but with great skill into the novel. And you get the sense that Lazarus Gardens, where much of the plot of the novel unwinds, could very easily be a place that many Jamaicans would be familiar with in both the aspects that make it a community space and also those that also make it implicitly a violent and a dangerous place to live. And in creating this particular enclave of community, what did you draw on, perhaps beyond your lived experience of
Mhm.
what that kind of community was like or would be like for Jamaicans who were of an age with you, or perhaps older or even younger?
Yeah, it's important to say that there is no place in Jamaica actually called Lazarus Gardens. It's actually a composite of different places. However, it's reflective of what we call the garrison communities. That these would have been the communities set up usually around 70s or 80s, again along political lines, by politicians. They say, okay, everybody in this area, I'm giving you housing, you're gonna vote for me. And you have the people who ensure that people vote along certain lines, to put it mildly. um, how I know about this society, I would say that to a great degree, middle class Jamaicans, there's a way in which you'll never relate to the lifestyle in the inner city. And in fact, that's one of the themes in this, because there are many Jamaicans. There's the middle class, there's the upper class, there's the uber wealthy, there's the inner city, like, and to some degree, there are places in Jamaica that middle class people don't really go into. You're not welcomed into the space because as an outsider, you're viewed with suspicion, right? And it's just not necessarily, it's not safe. So, but my mom for almost over 30 years taught at a school that was located in one of those communities, in Olympic Gardens. And I actually attended that school for a period of my life as well. And because of that experience and hearing from other classmates who came from the area what it was like, sometimes having to be under the bed, for fear of gunshots and all these kind of things. And so it's really, this thing is not something you can learn about in a history book. It's really talking to the people who live there today, who understand what it was like then as well. And people like my mom who would have had that exposure. And then too, we've had helpers and people who work with us who are from those communities and who can say, okay, this is what it is like, in a way that really a book can't really tell you. And even then, I don't think I've tried my best to do justice to it, but I'm not gonna say that, oh, it's a completely perfect. It's, in a way, it's still imagined, but I've tried to be as authentic as I possibly could.
Thank you for that. And I feel that in examining the motivations of the characters, both of those who are central to the narrative, and also because it's a richly populated world and we meet so many people and we get to hear from so many of them as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of how you give access to different points of view so fluidly across the breadth of the novel. The motivations of Dinah in particular, I think, are handled with extreme grace and an understanding and insight. Because often when in certainly in Caribbean literature and in our culture, when the idea of maternal abandonment comes up, usually the response is that such a thing is unthinkable. And I think what the novel does is unravels that idea of the unthinkable and shows the reasons how such a choice can be made, things that motivate an acute desperation for want for a better life for one's child. And so tell me a bit about, if you could walk us through what it was like to tell Dinah so insightfully and to really show her so openly to the reader.
Well, thank you for that. I only hope to be insightful, so it's good that you think so, and I'm thankful for that comment. I think, there's some writers who plot things, Shivanee, who know and understand, and they do the profile of the character before they start. And in a real sense, this was not the case for me. I'm not a plotter, right? My writing is, and my brother thinks I'm like crazy. I would just hear a voice, right? And I go with it. I was living in Barbados, washing my dishes one afternoon, thinking about I was in a postgraduate writing course and I had an assignment and I'm saying, okay, what am I gonna write? Then the voice of Dinah came and said, oh, I was, wake up this morning on the water that feel too green. And of course I put the dishes down and then I went for my paper and just started to write. So in a real sense, I think the best writing comes from a subconscious. And in a way, as I said, my influences with the help of before, these things were already under the surface. And it's when you talked about the maternal abandonment, one of the things I came to realize, seeing helpers that grew up with me, they were taking care of me and my brother, but they invariably had children of their own that they had left behind in the country, because mostly women from rural communities. And unlike smaller islands, because of the size of Jamaica, they can't go back and forth necessarily. So they'd come and they take their weekend off every other week, and then they go back. So they were raising us while their children were being raised by extended family or other people. But it was a way for them to be able to survive, to provide for those children. So, and certainly in Jamaica, especially in the 80s, what we would have seen was the moms and fathers leaving, going to Canada, UK, America, to make life, and the book also explores this. I mentioned a character, Damien, just now in the reading, and his mother, Kathleen. So Damien is Apollo's age and is one of the guys that lives in the tenement yard. And he is sort of brushing with criminality, but his mother went away, again, fleeing political violence and also looking for a better life, was never heard from. So, in a real sense, that sense of maternal abandonment, it's when you understand that people don't necessarily make the choices the willingly, there are factors that go behind it. And what may appear to be abandonment is really them trying to seek a better life for the family, and this book deals with what I call that mother wound, which is,
Mhm.
well, how do you deal with now that that maternal or parental figure is not there, and you're left now to basically grow yourself to be that woman, to be a man, and what does that mean? So various characters in this novel, even Dinah herself, she's a caregiver for her own mother who is struggling with dementia, and although she's present, in a way she's absent, and how to deal with that. And you know motherhood is a big theme in the novel. And so again, it's based on observing and seeing in the society that the answers aren't always black and white. It's not always an easy decision where people have to make real choices that seem to fracture a family in order to provide for that same family.
And I think the novel sort of clocks in at just over, I believe, just over 400 pages. And so at the
Yeah,
outset it can
it's
seem like
big.
quite an undertaking. But when you immerse yourself in the world of your novel, you realize that all these perspectives are deeply necessary. And that's one thing that your debut offers the reader is the multiplicity of perspective. We get to hear a lot from Dinah. We also get to hear from Regina, from British, from Apollo, from Eddie. I mean, the cast of characters, whether they are huge movers and shakers to the plot of the novel, or whether their perspectives are more angular, almost everyone gets a chance to be heard and
Mhm.
to really examine their own motivations in from chapter to chapter. And I felt this was a good place for us to talk about the craft of shaping the book,
Mhm.
which is it feels very intentional in how you've handled it with short, sometimes even concise chapters that are very narratively driven. And it then emerges like a book in which multiple voices are speaking to us as readers
Mhm.
directly. Did
Mhm.
the formatting of What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You feel really intentional in that sense? Or did it kind of shape its way as it went along, as the book kind
Mhm.
of declared more and more of itself to you?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I suppose I could have written this book all in third person in English. Um, that's a choice I could have made, but I wanted to write in my Creole, my patois, in getting our voices on the page, right? And in doing so, I also know that the example people often give, if you have three people watch a car accident and you ask them after what happened, you're probably
Mhm.
going to get three different accounts. Somebody is going to tell you the car was yellow and another one say it was red, because each side, but our
Mhm.
perception of what we focus on and what we see is different. So for me, my feeling is that the truth is derived at having all the perspectives together and then allowing the reader to kind of then draw the truth from that. Because spoiler alert, in this novel, I don't tell you whether Apollo is really Dinah's child or not, and that's intentional because there are clues either way. It could go either way, but at the end of the day, I think for me, truth is not, again, not so black and white. There's so much gray, and I wanted in this piece, in this work, to show the story from different perspectives, as you said, because I felt that that would add to the richness of it. So it was a deliberate decision in terms of craft, that looking chapters in first person. I'm going to do some in third. I even have a second person chapter in there, Shivani, where the reader becomes part of the story. On the night of a robbery, it's like the reader is there, you're walking your pet poodle, right? Like, I do crazy things in this book. And kudos to my publisher, Virago Press, and my editor and my agent who, when they read it, they helped to rein me in, because believe it or not, it was more, right? So they helped bring me in and say, okay. But I think writing is playfulness, writing is joy. And if when I'm writing it, I'm enjoying it, then that's the reason why I keep going. So as I said, it was intentional, and in fact, the shortness of the chapters, again, because I'm a short story writer by nature. And again, a Jamaican, I'm into the sprinting. I'm not the marathon thing, and so I'm just writing this quick chapter here, this other one here, and I think the biggest lesson I've learned, because now I'm currently editing the second novel, is okay, as a short story writer, you're able to get things down quickly, concisely, but then the editing process now, having to step back and as my editor says, seeding up to the thing. So dropping the little breadcrumbs as to the thing that's going to happen, and after it's happened, referencing it back, so you have the threads and the through lines and all the arcs of character development and then relationship development and all of those things that, for me, I love to just do a first draft, Shivani, and I can do a first draft of a novel within 2 months, maybe 3 months. And then
Wow.
the hard work then is making something of this mess that's on the page, making, those through lines, those connections, developing it. And it's really true, guys, that writing is rewriting and editing, which is not my forte, not something I really enjoy. But then it's in the crafting of it that afterwards I can look back and say, okay, the finished product is so much stronger than if I just was allowed to go frolicking on my own.
I think, well, many things to say in response to that. And the first would be that it, at every point, feels like a very intentionally crafted novel. The second is that I think you really reclaim and reshape the idea of that Greek chorus in storytelling, and
Yes.
show us what all the members of the community, which is our community, in which our languages and our tongues and our stories are invested, giving them a chance to speak.
You hit the nail on the head, because my editor, when she first got the manuscript, that's literally what her email says. This reads like a Greek chorus, and that's why she wanted to work with me on it. So exactly, Shivani, exactly.
I promise I haven't been reading her emails, but that very strongly came to mind. And dealing with a chorus of anything, and in this case of it, voices and perspectives, I think multiplies the extent to which you, as the writer, navigate heavy and serious emotions. I mean, it's a book that does open itself to the possibility of joy, but it also does not shy away from how difficult things have been in each of the characters' pasts. And so as I read, I got intensely curious about what the effects of living with the emotional lives of all of these characters were
Mhm.
for you, because it's so much even to have in your mind the inner story of one main character. I mean, if What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You were told solely from Dinah's perspective, I would think even that would be quite a lot to untangle and unravel. But you've done so much more than that. And I wanted to know what the effects felt like to you, especially post publication, and then that there's been time for the book to kind of sit and live in the world a bit.
Yeah, yeah, that's a brilliant question. And I want to pick up on what you said first about the darkness or pain and then joy, because although I'm writing about people who are going through trauma in this book, are people from inner city and having real struggles. um, I see my writing as a way to write the light.
Mhm.
So my job is to render the story as truthfully or as authentically as I can. At the same time, to sort of challenge the characters and the readers in a way to say it's never all darkness. And that's one of the things that even Regina explains to Apollo when he says, all you people in the inner city just having babies all over the place and asking for handouts, and, begging me money, all these things. And so look, we're having children the same reason that rich people have them. We want family, we want love, we want, like there's no difference really between the kinds of things that, people want and their desires. And in terms of finding the joy, at one scene when Apollo is looking in Lazarus Garden, there's a madman there washing himself under a broken manhole, what you call it, fire hydrant, and he's
Mhm.
having the time of his life. Like there are so many moments like you can find the joy even in the tough places. And for that scene or that chapter, Shivani, where Apollo is observing, I actually went downtown that day with my family. They were off doing some errands, and I actually cataloged all these things happening, of course, change details, but being able to, I think as writers, it's our job to observe and to see the light and the things that other people miss and to put that on paper. Um, I think I've gotten sidetracked now, Siobhan. I told you this could happen. So for me now, emotionally, when I'm in the process of writing, the characters never stop talking. So I'd be in the shower, as I said, I'd be driving to work, I'd be doing whatever, and they're coming at me to say the particular thing that needs to get said. There's a particular scene in here that with Dinah as to why she's so fiercely protective of Apollo now that happened when she was pregnant. That didn't come to me until like months after the first draft, right? Um, I don't live with them after, and here is why. Because I feel like as a writer, my job is to ensure that I get it done and get it done as faithfully as possible, and then to move on to the next
Mhm.
story. And so there's no part two to this. I've said everything that I felt needed to be said in
Mhm.
this, and then I'm on to it. Because as soon as I was done, I said, okay, maybe I have a little bit of ADHD. I've not been diagnosed, but I'm very I just easily distracted, and I need things to keep my attention. So once this was finished, moved on to the second, move on to the third. I just want to keep going. I want to put more and more stories down. So in the process of getting it done, yes, it is hard, and because you're putting yourself in these sort of the mindset, but once it's over, I'm also one of those people can compartmentalize very well. And so
Mhm.
once I've said everything I need to oh, that's spoken to me since this novel ended. That's it.
I think that's a healthy way of going about things.
But
Certainly.
I mean, this is the first one, right? I can't say if that's going to be the case all the time, but certainly for this one, I just had to move on because I had other stories to tell.
Yes, and it would get very crowded, I think, if you were constantly living with all your characters 24/7.
Correct.
But Sharma, I
Correct.
think the last question I want to ask before I invite you to do your second reading, and I have so many questions, I'm having to be very,
How much time do we have left?
very
Because I think
specific.
I
The,
could
the,
do this with you for another 2 hours,
the
and even if
time
it takes
just,
me,
it tends to just evaporate, I realize, in bios and bookmarks. This is something about the energy of the books. Um, But I really wanted us to talk a bit about the relationship between Dinah and Apollo, and the way in which you, to me as a reader, draw Apollo back into the world of the novel is such a good foil and comparison for how so many returning Jamaicans, and of course this book is set historically, but even now, grapple with their sense of not understanding fully who they are, to what extent they belong to the Jamaican political landscape, the physical landscape. And Apollo, clearly, I think this is something you seed quite well. We're talking about seeding information as a novelist, has attachments to both Dinah and to the land that are not easily explained, which kind
Mhm.
of it suggests something that I've come across in several Caribbean books, that there is an intangible something that draws us
Mhm.
to the places we're from. And it can be
Mhm.
something that you try to run away from and try to otherwise evade, but it has a way of catching up with you.
Yes.
And I wanted to know what it was like to write that through his character, who's also dealing with conflicting feelings about his identity.
Yeah. I think to a great extent, even if you live and die in the same place, you're always trying to figure out who we are, and who we're becoming. At least those of us who's a little bit more conscious of ourselves and how we're being in the world. And so again, identity is one of those themes that I am fascinated by, and who determines who we are, because in Jamaica, we're told most of our population is outside. So if we have 3 million Jamaicans in Jamaica, we have another 3 or 4 outside, because we tend to migrate a lot. We are, a lot of our economies depends on remittances from people who've left. We export our doctors and teachers and nurses and all of that. So um, in a real sense, even people who are not from here are staunch Jamaican. When I'd go to visit, let's say, my cousins in New York who have Jamaican parents but who didn't grow up here, they're listening to the music, they're eating the food, like they're just as Jamaican as I am. It just talk funny, right? So it's a sense of, and I got that feeling when I went to Africa in 20, I think it would have been what, so about 5 or 6 years ago. No, when I was doing my postgrad studies, I was in New Zealand. And when I got off the plane and I set foot, this was South Africa, and I set foot on the soil, I felt like it sounds very cliche and I can't explain it, but I felt like I was coming back home. And now, obviously, we know the history of blacks in the Caribbean, and enslaved Africans, and so it would have more likely been Western Africa. But something about setting foot on the continent and just looking and just seeing the horizon, I felt like, oh, I'm to be here, And I don't know how to explain it, but it's just a thing. It's just a thing. And I'm sure I'm not answering the question correctly, but it's one of those things that the novel plays with, because I'm still trying to figure it out myself. Why did I feel like I just felt like I was to be there? And this is where I'm from, and in a real way that I felt in my spirit, that as a writer, it's strange, I can't fully explain.
I think you answered it beautifully. That there is just something unexplainable about certain kinds of attachment, which
Yeah,
is,
and
I
and
think, go
yeah, and
ahead.
attachment we choose to, right?
Mhm.
In a way, Apollo in this novel is raised by a African American mother and a white stepfather. His father, he was told, died in a car crash when he was young. So he's growing up in a white privileged Republican sort of society, trying to assert himself and his blackness in a form of almost rebellion. But he doesn't know who he is. And I've had African American male readers who've read Apollo and said, he's so, it's like you want to shake him. He doesn't know who he is, but he's trying to figure out himself. He's trying to figure out who he is, and that's why he aligns with Jamaica and these people who have, majority black government. And when he comes, I see black policemen, and at one scene, his policeman sort of speaks harshly to his stepfather and with authority, and he's never seen this before, and so it's sort of exploring all of those dynamics, again, because these are things that we see in the Caribbean that I find fascinating, because I tend to write things I find that interests me, but even questions I can't answer, but I just find interesting, that we see in our Caribbean societies.
I think that's a great note for you to do your second reading. We do have a lovely question from Ira Mathur that we'll get to when you are concluded. So I will hand over to you.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to read, um, this chapter is called British, and I hope I don't go too fast. I'll take my glasses off because I'm nearsighted, actually. So I actually see better without my glasses if I'm reading. Um, the house belonging to the Eridan British was the only one in the Lazarus Gardens community with air conditioning. It had not one, but 6 AC units, one in each of the 5 bedrooms and another in the living room. They blasted all night, even the nights when there was a chill in the air after rain. The Don had enjoyed the bitter British winters before being deported back to Jamaica for killing a rival drug dealer. He loved the numbing feeling of coldness, how you could see your own breath leaving your body on the wind, how you had to look down on your fingers and rub them together to feel that they were still there, how the cold air moved through to your bones. And like everybody else living in Lazarus Gardens, British didn't pay any electricity or water bills. Utility companies dared not send their staff inside Lazarus Gardens to disconnect anything. Policemen didn't go into Lazarus Gardens either. They also knew better. The single police station on the outskirts of the community were manned by 3 cops who hid inside the gray and blue building all day. The station had been there from before independence in 1962, a calming presence for the neighboring upper middle class communities. These upscale communities had now declined, transformed into rundown dwellings with untended hedges, rusty slouching gates, and grimy, slowly crumbling walls. So the police station remained, and Assistant Police Commissioner Davis, who was responsible for the area, didn't have to suffer the indignity of going on national TV and telling the public and reporters, shoving microphones in his face, that Jamaica's constabulary force had closed a whole police station due to criminal elements. The 3 policemen clocked in the morning, spent the day playing cards, and left before dark. An easy enough assignment. British and Assistant Commissioner Davis had reached a truce, an unspoken but well understood agreement that no blood would be shed as long as each kept to their own area. It was British who maintained the law inside Lazarus Gardens. Murder, rape, theft, and assault in the community were at an all time low because Brit, as his closest associates called him, no play that. British was judge, jury, and executioner. Retribution was as sure as it was swift. No one even wanted to be accused. No corroborating evidence or testimony was needed if British believed the accuser. Bodies were dumped into gullies, taken out to sea during the next rainfall, or eaten by stray dogs or a hungry crocodile in the nearby gully. There was once a man said to have raped a disabled old woman, and another man accused of murdering a toddler. British kept the men's bones after they were burnt, crushed them down to a grainy powder, and kept them in the flower pots at the back of his yard. How British looked at it was this: God made people, and then he, British, turned people into duppies, from spirit to body to spirit again. He considered the residents of Lazarus Gardens his people. He was their leader. He didn't like the newspapers using area down to describe him. It was an insulting term, demeaning. He wasn't elected, but he was the people's prime minister. No, he was their king. They were always coming to him, always needing him to pay school fee, buy school book and uniform, for money to go to the doctor or corner shop. With British, a man didn't have to look into the open, empty mouths of his children like they were baby birds ready for feeding. He didn't have to feel the pang of having no food to give. British liked to gaze out in the distance at what looked like a beautiful yellow curtain, a sail unfurling in the breeze. It was that time of year in Kingston when, it was that time of year when Kingston was blanketed in millions of tiny yellow butterflies. The bloom of purplish blue buds in linked vitae trees heralded their coming. Butterflies coated the bushes a pale yellow, danced in the air, floated above traffic lights and across window panes, swarming and pulsing, almost magical the way they open and close their wings in the sunshine like splintering beams of light. Magnificent hordes of them, some landing on your face and chest and in your hair, dusting your earlobes before dying on the road, like intricate leaves falling to earth amidst engine oil, grease, and squealing tires, squashed underfoot like candles blown out by God. British was admiring the butterflies the day Strego and Damien came to them with their plan. He had listened patiently, but he didn't care much about robberies. The take from home robberies accounted only for a small portion of his enterprise's revenues. But he viewed the robbery operations as part of a training school, an opportunity for men with an entrepreneurial streak to run their own small businesses, to assemble and lead a team of their own, to plan and execute their own jobs. For those who demonstrated exemplary performance, home invasions were a stepping stone to senior leadership in his organization. British knew that for Strego, this wasn't about robbing some valuables from a rich man. Struggle wanted to show British he could plan and run key parts of his operations, that he could be promoted, given more responsibility and men of his own to lead. The stakes were high. If Struggle failed, he would suffer the consequences. Struggle knew British left no room for mistakes. That's it.
Thank you so much for that second reading, Sharma. You really throw us into the world of Lazarus Gardens through all the characters we meet and remind us that 1980s Jamaica was definitely a real place. As someone who was born in the 80s, I'm often drawn to narratives about it. And in a way, though I'm Trinidadian, I felt very much at home in the world that you created in this novel.
Thank you. That's what I want to hear. And that's what I want every reader, regardless of where you're from, to feel. I remember when I met with a publisher, one of them said, the specific is universal. This woman had no idea what it would be like to live in Lazarus Gardens or this kind of world. It was so far removed from her day-to-day experience. But something my grandaunt always said, people are people are people. And if you render it in sufficient detail and authentically, no matter where people are from, they can still see things that they can relate to in a story. And at least that's what I find when I encounter a well-written novel.
We have a lovely question from Ira about the specifics of writing. She asks, Sharma, how quickly did you move on after your book was published towards drafting your second?
Okay, good question. So I finished the draft of, because this novel went through to multiple drafts. So those on the call who are published writers would know that you have to go through a series of edits, structural edits, and all of those kind of things till you get the final version. So actually, there's about a good year or more between when you've sort of completed the editing and then when the actual publication happens, because there's a run up in terms of marketing and PR and all of that. So, but for me, in terms of when I finished substantially the first version, within a couple months, I would have moved on to the next one. And what for me, once I'm writing something, and in every season, I try to have new words on the page. So if I'm writing short stories, I'm adding to a novel, I'm also editing or trying to revise what would have happened before. Um, but yeah, I don't spend all my time like editing old stuff, because I tell you, I like new, I like fresh, I like always to be writing. So um, those things happen for me simultaneously, but at different parts of the day. So maybe the first half I'm putting fresh words on the page, and then second half I'm editing what I did before, editing a different project.
Thank you for that answer. I think a lot of viewers are on some path towards writing and publication themselves. And I think it's always so useful for published writers like yourself and also like Ira to share where they've been on that journey. I think
Yeah,
it can be nothing but helpful to make
yeah.
that information just so accessible, which is
And I
one thing I hope that Bios and Bookmarks does.
And I should say I got a two-book deal, which meant that they got the draft of the first one and they paid me in advance for the next one, which hadn't yet been written. So I had to write it to be able to not give back their money. They would have gotten the pitch, which is like a one page of what I think is going to happen in the book. But I actually didn't have to write it. So probably that was why I also moved on so quickly.
The pressure was a good incentive in this
Yes,
case.
it was. It was.
So all our Bios and Bookmarks family knows we can't let Sharma leave without inviting her to play our season's game. And if you have been paying attention, you'll know this season is called Walking to the Revolution. Here is how it works. Sharma's book, What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You, is walking down the street, arm in arm with two other books. The three books are going to the political rally or protest of their choice to demonstrate about an issue that is dearest to their heart. We've asked Sharma which two books these would be and why she would choose them to accompany her novel. Sharma, take it away with your choices.
Okay, so I know they're gonna come up on the screen. One choice is The Last Warner Woman by Kai Miller, and the other one is Angel Share by Garfield Ellis. You'll notice both are Jamaican men, um, coincidentally. The reason I chose them, I've always been a fan of Kai Miller. He actually As part of that same Bocas Prize, I was privileged to have him as my mentor in terms of the support in getting this first novel done, and I've always admired the way the craft. He is able to write in such a way that the prose is just beautiful. In the book Last Warner Woman, he explores the story of a woman who in Jamaica we know as the Warner Woman. So these are women who will come on the bus and they say, repent and Jesus is at hand, and they prophesy all these things. And we're used to them in the Caribbean, but he sort of asked the question, what if a woman like that goes to England? They're gonna think she's crazy. Whereas in the Caribbean, we're somehow moved and we understand and we take her seriously. But over there, they're like, okay, we need to put her in a mental institution, right? Um, and the story is told through the perspective of there's a man who comes to Jamaica to write her story, who is living in England because she's in England now. And halfway through the book, or a little bit in the beginning part, you know, so we're reading, and which is the writer's account of this woman's life, and then all of a sudden you see on the page, okay, this writer man telling lies on me or whatever. No, she's introduced herself into the story, and it turns out it's because she's found his notes and so on. But I thought it was such a creative and clever thing that Kai did. And as I said, I'm all about craft and admiring the craft. And I won't spoil it for you if you haven't read it, but there's a particular relationship between her and the writer man, as she calls him. And so it's also looking at family dynamics too. So again, because although my novel is big in scope, as you've said, there are many themes, it still comes down to who is family, what is family, how do we choose our family or not, or how we navigate in terms of community. And so that book looks at that. Angel's Share, the late Garfield Ellis. Now, I would encourage everybody, if you've never read anything by Garfield Ellis, go out right after this and buy everything he's ever written. He had, again, craft, technical craft, amazing. So I've always been a fan of his as well. And in the book Angel's Share, it's about a young man who gets a call from his stepmother that his father has gone missing. Turns out the father is in search of his long lost love. I think he saw her 35 years ago, and he goes off on this adventure. And he's estranged from it. The father and son are not on the best of terms. They're sort of estranged, and he feels he has to give up his life now to accompany his father on this crazy mission to find this woman. And again, it's again fathers and sons and family relationship and that sort of dynamic. So again, that's why I feel it kind of sits with mine, but also because I just love Garfield Ellis. Now, you only asked me to pick two because I have so many Caribbean writers I admire. Many on this call now, and many of my friends in Trinidad and Barbados and all over the Caribbean and in the UK. But I couldn't pick every book, so I had the hard choice of picking these two.
Thank you so much, Sharma. It's lovely to know what books we also as Caribbean writers reach for as readers, because I firmly believe, and I'm sure you do too, that the two are closely and forever intertwined. It's very difficult to be a writer if you don't read,
Yeah,
despite whatever strange theories anyone out there might have.
it
And
boggles the mind. It boggles the mind. And Shivani, I must say this for me, and there's a tip because I know aspiring or emerging writers are on the call too. And you talk this thing about writer's block, like what do you do when you feel like you can't write? What I do, I get a book. Like I would read somebody's book. I read a chapter of the book. I'm reading Tiffany Unique's The Land of Love and Drowning right now, right? Even as I'm editing the second novel. So like find books that spark you and you wish, my God, I wish I wrote this. You read that for like a chapter and it invigorates you to go and finish what you have to do. So reading, fundamental.
in that spirit, anyone who has not picked up Sharma's excellent debut novel, What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You, please remedy that. We've been sharing links throughout the course of the session that you can find directly on the publisher's website. If you happen to be in Trinidad, I know for a fact that Paper Based Bookshop has Sharma's book in stock, so you can head over there
And Kingston
and
Bookshop
grab
in
them.
Jamaica.
Yes, excellent. So you know where to go in two countries now, and there are very few excuses. Sharma, I want to thank you so much for being
It
a
has,
huge part of our season finale.
it has been my pleasure. Like it's such an honor to be able to close out the season and to spend this time with you and to share. It's tremendous. Like this is what gives me life, literally. Like now reinvigorated to start the rest of my day.
It's been a really outstanding season finale with you. I hope it's invigorated everyone who's been tuning in to read and write and do both of those things if you do both. Thank you all for being here, for supporting Caribbean literature, for writing it and for reading it. This season has been The Complexity of Caribbean Love, and as always, it's been powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. Thank you also to all the other writers and guest hosts who made up Season 8. We are deeply appreciative of your time and your talent. Until next time, I'm Shivanee Ramlochan, and it has been a pleasure to be in conversation with you all. Take care, everyone.
Bye.